How's it going, everybody? All right, so today's video we're gonna be building the ultimate game gear. So we have the RetroSix clean juice here. That's with the 2 batteries. We get VGA out, we get the new shell, new glass lands, some new buttons, of course the clean screen, and we have the master system player. So this all is going to be going inside this shell here. I'm going with the brown today, checking it out. So we got the brown shell, white lands, and white buttons. So let's go ahead and get to it. All right, so first I'm gonna go ahead and open this guy up, and we're gonna fully recap it and make sure everything's properly working before we go ahead and put it in the new shell here. Now I'll be just kind of running through all the steps here to make it quick, because I don't want to make a 2-hour video. There's a lot of videos on YouTube, or even I got a few how to properly recap, how to install the clean screen. So there's plenty of videos, of that. So I'm not gonna go into details. So I'm just gonna be gliding through all the steps here and showing you, the complete process. So let's go ahead and start by opening this thing up and start recapping it. Alright, let's take a look inside and see how much damage was done. Well, to my surprise, this one is not too bad. And now, as you know, most of these, the capacitors leak and just creates a big mess on the board. But this one held up not too bad. But either way, I'm going to go ahead and take all these old ones off and put on the new ones. And I will be using the RetroSix ceramic capacitor kit. You can get these off the website, and I will leave links to everything that I'm using today here. Now what I like to do is just use a pair of pliers and lift the capacitors off the pad as they are glued down, and then just use one of your fingers and wiggle the capacitors back and forth, and they will just come right off the board here. Now you don't want to use too much force and lift it up, just wiggle back and forth so you don't rip any of the pads. Alright, so with all the capacitors removed, I'm going to go ahead and prepare the pads here. And I'm using MTech 213 flux here. So pretty much just add some flux to each pad. And then using your hard iron, just make sure you got plenty of flux on each pad. Put your tip right on each pad and just rub it back and forth, removing the old legs and all the gunk left behind from the old capacitors. So just gently go over each pad. You don't want to push too hard. You don't want to rip the pads off, but making sure nothing is left behind, so the pad is nice and clean and ready to go for the new capacitors. Okay, and here I'm just going over the pads and reflowing it with some new solder. So just add plenty of flux and add some solder on the tip of the gun, and then just touch up each pad here, making sure you got plenty of solder on each pad, so it's ready to go for the new caps. And it always helps if you got good flux, because that flux, it just does not stick well to the pads. Alright, so if all the caps replaced, all is left is clean your board. And I'm using 91% ISO, so just removing all the old flux around the caps, making sure there's no flux left and any debris that's left on the board. I already went over everything, but just showing you what needs to be done, is you don't want any of the old flux left on the board. You don't want to have a nice clean board ready to go. Alright, so now all I have left is the power board and the audio board. Now since I won't be using the original power board, because I'll be using the clean juice here, I'm going to leave the recapping for later on this one. So all I gotta do is just recap the audio board. So it's the same procedure, just remove the old caps and put on the new ceramic capacitors, and all of these will be getting the 100 microfarads capacitor, the ceramic capacitor. So what I do to remove these is just take a pair of pliers and just gently twist it back and forth, because most of these already corroded and leaked. They will just break right off nice and easy. So go ahead and remove all of them and replace all the capacitors. So I'll be back when it's all done. And just like that, we are done. Okay, so that pretty much completes recapping the full Game Gear. So we're now gonna go ahead and move on installing the clean screen mod. Alright, so we need to go ahead and remove the motherboard from the front shell here. So this holds the screen and all the buttons here. So let's go ahead and remove that. Alright, so with the board out, there's a few components we need to go ahead and remove before we start the clean screen installation. So it's basically these two capacitors here, the coil and a few resistors. So you can follow the instructions that comes with the clean screen, but I'm just gonna go ahead and race through this and get it done. So let me go ahead and remove those components first. We're ready for the clean screen installation. So we got the driver board here, and I will be using the wire-free kit here. And I like to prepare and prep all the pads, pre-solder them, so that way it's gonna be a lot easier for me to put on the flex cable. So I'm just gonna go ahead and run through and pre-solder all the pads on the Game Gear driver board and on the actual Game Gear board. Alright, so if all the pads prepared, I can go ahead and start putting on the flex cable. All right, now you can use the 4 screws that you removed from the old screen to put back into the new bracket here. These 4 holes here, and with the 3D printed bracket, that will keep the new screen in place. So let's go ahead and put the screws in. All right, so with the bracket in, everything properly connected, and put a game in, let's go ahead and connect the cleanjuice board here, and we'll give it a test. All right, here we go. All right, everything's looking good. Brightness works. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and continue. Alright, so the next thing we need to do is install the VGA connector. So this will be going right in the bottom back shell, right in the middle over here. So we need to cut out a little notch here, and then that VGA connector will slide right in there. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this connector out and measure how deep I need to cut. The VGA connector sits inside, and then the actual cable is a little wider, so the hole needs to be a bit wider than the actual VGA connector. So you actually want to cut the size of the cable here. So we're just gonna go ahead and trace it, and then I'm gonna cut around it. All right, so I traced the outline of the VGA outside of the VGA cable. So now I'm gonna go ahead and Dremel out that area right there. All right, so I Dremeled out the rough dimension. Now I'm just gonna go ahead and file down so the corners are nice and smooth, and the cable goes in nicely. All right, so it's gonna be about there. So as you see, when you put that connector in, the hole has to be, or the opening has to be a bit bigger than the actual VGA connector, because the cable or the VGA connector goes inside of the cable. So your dimension needs to be the size of the VGA cable. So it goes in here just like that. All right, so now I'm gonna go ahead and connect this connector to the actual gamegear driver board. All right, now to connect the VGA connector to the clean screen board, basically we need to wire 6 wires from the clean screen board to the VGA pins here, and they are numbered here. I'm using pliers to hold it in place, just whatever I had available. So this corner here, it's gonna be 1, and then up to 15. So 1, 2, 3. We're gonna wire 3 wires from 1 to 3, and then these top 3 pins, first 3 pins, is gonna be your ground, so they need to be connected together. And then we're gonna have 13 and 14, and that's gonna be your horizontal sync and vertical sync cables. The first 3 here are gonna be your red, green, and blue cables. Let's go ahead, and I'm gonna pre-solder the wires on the VGA connector first, and then I'm gonna connect the wires on to the clean screen board. Alright, so the cable's connected to the VGA connector. Now I'm going to go ahead and solder on to the clean screen board. Pin number 1 is going to be red. And pin number 2 on the VGA is going to be green. And then pin number 3 is going to be blue. Alright, and then you have your 3 pins right in the middle that's connected together. And that's going to be your ground cable. And then your last 2 pins going to be 13 and 14 on the bottom row. So 13 is going to be horizontal sync, and 14 is going to be your vertical sync. All right, so that's connected. All right, so I have the VGA all connected here. Whoops, it's a bit messy, but it still needs to be cleaned up a little bit around the edges here, but for the most part it looks good. So put it in there and then use the 2 screws to tighten it in place. Now I'd usually put some hot glue around the connector on the inside here, just to keep you know, when you push the cable in and out, keep it in place here, so it'll be more secure, and also keep the wires in place here. So, but for the most part it's all done. So now all we gotta do is go ahead and drop in the batteries and put in the audio board and the cleanjuice power board. All right, so let's go ahead and put in the audio board in. All right, so now let's go ahead and put in the cleanjuice power board. All right, in the final step, we're gonna go ahead and connect the batteries. So the battery's in. Now we're gonna go ahead and test fit the front shell. Make sure everything comes in together and the screen is properly aligned. So I'm gonna skip out on the buttons for now. I'm just gonna go ahead and put the screen in and make sure that everything is good before I put the buttons in and close it and fasten it to the shell. All right, so the screen looks nice and aligned. Everything looks pretty good. So let's go ahead, put in the buttons and get it ready to go. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and test out the VGA and make sure everything's working properly. Let's connect the cable here. Okay, now to activate the VGA out, we're going to press start and left together. Alright, so all we got left to do is put on the lands and we're all done. So it looks good so far. So let's go ahead and put on the lands. Alright, and we are all done. Turned out pretty good. So we got the VGA out, and we got the RetroSix battery pack, and of course we have the Master System player. Now unfortunately I do not have any games that I can test with it, but it will be included with this console. So alright, well I hope you learned something from this video. If you have any questions, leave it in the comments below, and thank you for watching.